Hello, this is Dr. Dave Maslach talking to you about reciprocity.com. And in this particular video, I wanted to actually talk to you about what are the advantages of doing a PhD or a DBA in a business administration. So what is the advantages of actually getting a PhD? In business administration. So I'm a professor of innovation strategy and entrepreneurship, and this whole reciprocity project, a lot of it is about me trying to give back as much as I possibly can and sort of help out other people that are sort of going through the same steps that I went through and sort of build a program that I can actually give back as much as I possibly can and be able to do good science at the same time. So part of it is, I'm trying to help out other people sort of make these decisions at critical moments in my own life. And that was sort of coming up with this was sort of a critical thing that I had to sort of think through. I was 24 years old when I first started thinking of doing, I was probably about 23 when I first started thinking of doing a PhD. And it was a really tough kind of thing to think about, right? So I could go into many different areas. So I was trained as an engineer, and then I did a master's degree in management science. And then, I was like, oh, I can go back into engineering or do something completely different, go into law school. I actually wrote the LSAT, by the way, or go and do a PhD in business. And I chose to do a PhD in business, but it was kind of a blind. So there's this term that we use in research. It's called blind search. So I didn't really understand really what was going on. So I thought it'd be helpful to you. So this is part of my thesis help series. So it's anybody that is, and it's a very applicable for anybody that's interested in doing research or going into getting a PhD or going into graduate school. So what are the advantages of a PhD in business administration? There are a lot of advantages. I'm not going to get into any of the disadvantages because there's a lot of disadvantages as well of doing a PhD in business administration. So I might do a video in the future about that. But what are the advantages of a PhD in business administration? Well, first of all, if you're rational like I am, and I'm really financially rational a lot of different ways, the salaries, so PhD salaries or DBA salaries are actually quite good. So here's the catch. You might want to compare it to doing an MBA, right? So what is the difference between a PhD and an MBA? Well, MBA is generally a 1 to 2 year program that trains you mostly coursework. It's a lot different though. It's mostly like training you on how to actually work in the workforce. But a PhD or DBA is training you on the theory of how companies and organizations and groups of people, how they actually function and how they work and what is the science that we know about those kind of things, right? So normally a PhD in a business administration, they will go and do work in a university of some sort, right? A DBA, on the other hand, unless you're going to Harvard, it's the only one that I know of. There might be others. The only one that I know of, a DBA, will train you on the theory of how organizations work and then throw you out into the working world. And you can actually go get a degree or work that way, right? So it's normally shorter. It's a lot more compressed. That DBA is compressed and things like that. I actually put a video, I think last week, about this. But the difference between salaries between an MBA and a DBA, sometimes they differ a lot. So a PhD or a PhD in business administration and a DBA are going to earn you kind of similar amounts of money, right? So a PhD and a DBA are going to earn you similar kinds of money. Maybe a DBA may actually earn you a lot more if you get the right career. And if you go into consulting or something like that, then you might actually end up making $300,000 to $500,000 if you are lucky in the right situation. If you're in a consulting firm, for example, that is taking off and doing very well, a PhD is going to probably earn you somewhere north a little bit better than $100,000. So somewhere between, but this is all in America and in Canada. So it's going to be somewhere in between $100,000 and $200,000, depending on what you're doing. If you're at the top of your game in a business school, and doing a PhD, you can make a lot more than that. But that's like the top of game of anybody, and that's somebody that's been out for like 30 years. And working for 30 years, and then they're making, at some schools it could be a substantial amount. At a state school or a public school, public institution, it's going to be a lot less because they can't pay for, taxpayers are not going to pay for those very, very high salaries, so it's not going to be nearly as much. But if you compare this to an MBA at a regular sort of state school, a regular in the U.S. and in Canada as well, unless you go to the top programs, very, very top programs, you're looking at, probably, I'm guessing about $60,000 a year when you get out. If you're going to like a Harvard, for example, you're looking at probably $150,000 when you get out. So there is a discretion, there's a lot of variability, and you have to kind of look at those and make that judgment call and where you're going and where you're applying to. So there's huge variability on the school that you go to and the sort of starting salaries that you get coming out of the particular institution. But generally, a DBA or a PhD is going to make you more money than an MBA, unless you go to a very high-end school, Harvard Business School, Stanford, things like that, Dartmouth for your MBA, and then you're going to do quite well if you do that kind of stuff. INSEAD's another one. So that's what you have to sort of think about. And sometimes actually it's kind of weird at those institutions, the professors actually end up making less than the people that are graduating with their MBA. It's a weird scenario, but it does happen a fair bit, actually. So you do take a price, a wage cut by pursuing a sort of scientific career in a university compared to what you can actually make in the working world, right? So in some programs it's a lot more than others, right? So in finance, those people make a tremendous pay cut to work in universities, at some of these universities, compared to actually getting if you had a PhD, if you went and had a MBA in finance and then you went and worked on Wall Street, some of those guys do extremely well. But looking at averages can really skew your ideas and skew things. So on average, or sort of where most people are, it's a lot lower and it's much more closer together. And generally, you can sort of think about each year that you do a advanced degree adds about $10,000 to your career. And that's kind of like, that's across most disciplines in a university. It's kind of like one of these sort of rough rules of, or rough sort of heuristics that economists use to sort of understand how much they can actually, how much schooling is actually worth, right? So if you think about that, PhD takes a lot more time than doing an MBA. You're going to make a little bit more money doing that. So enough about that. The second thing that you're going to sort of really like, and an advantage of doing a PhD in business administration, and once you start doing it, you're like, wow, you just know a lot, and it's really cool and really interesting. So, the downfall with knowing a lot, that you can sound like a know-it-all at parties and stuff like that. But the other side is that you just have this really rich appreciation of the world around you, and especially if you're doing a PhD in business administration or a DBA, you just have this like, wow, these organizations and the ones that do things well or not so well, it's really complicated and really interesting to a lot of different degrees, right? Like it's super fascinating once you start digging into that, and you're just going to be like, this is super, super cool. You're going to be drawn into that. And that is the biggest thing for doing a PhD. In any field, you're just really fascinated with what's going on. It's super, super interesting, some of the stuff that you sort of understand and start thinking about. And often you get these, what I call mind flips, and that happens, for me, it happens once a month, where I read something, I'm like, wow, I never thought about that. That was really clever, really cool. And then your sort of perspective on life changes a fair bit. The other thing that you're going to get, so the third thing is you're going to have a really good understanding of science and statistics, and it's not at all what you think it's going to be like. So statistics, really, it sort of shows you that the world is probabilistic. So the world is not sort of static, and it's really hard to sort of tease things apart. And that's one thing. You'll take a few courses on research methods, and then once you start doing it and start doing sort of scientific research in a PhD program, for example. DBA, it's a little bit, you'll do a little program or a little bit of sort of research, but not nearly as much. It's going to be mostly coursework in that. But with a PhD, you're going to start doing some research and you're like, wow, this is really difficult. And you get an appreciation of the sort of complexities of science in general. And that's a really cool insight that you get that not a lot of people understand and not a lot of people get. So you'll be in sort of an elite group, I guess, a small group of people that are interested in that kind of stuff. The fourth thing is that you can get a number of different jobs. So with a PhD in business administration, we're training you again. So at my institution or at any major research institution, we're training you to become researchers. And so you go out and you're actually going to work at a university. Maybe you work at a think tank. That's less likely, but that doesn't happen nearly as much. But a think tank might be, and the thing that we would all be proud about as sort of training people, if you worked at NBER, so the National Bureau of Economics Research, if you went and worked there, we'd be very, very proud of that sort of accomplishment because it's hard to get into that. So you might end up working at something like that. It's less common, but a lot of people work in a research university. That's sort of what we're training you to do. A lot of people will end up working at a teaching university or what's called a balanced school, which is a trade-off between sort of teaching a fair bit and as well as doing some research on the same side. So mostly, for the most part, at least in our field, or at least in a college of business or a business program, we're trying to train you to get out into the business, into universities and do your own research program. If you do a DBA, on the other hand, you're less likely to do that. You're going to go into industry. So it's not preventing you. We're not saying you can't go into industry in any sort of way if you do a PhD program in business. But we generally would like you to go that way. And if you are thinking about this, I'm going to do a PhD in business administration so I can go get a consulting job or go back into industry, unless you're doing an executive program, so that's different. So an executive PhD doctoral program is very similar to a DBA. To where you're going to be sort of learning about the theory of organizations. You can maybe do that on your part-time and stuff like that. That's actually really useful and really great because you can actually go into industry and that's totally fine. That's kind of an accepted career path. Or you could teach in a business school, so that's one component. But then there's a whole research component that generally you probably, if you want to do a research component and you're thinking about becoming a researcher, then you go the PhD route. And you're going to learn a lot that way. And we can, like one cool thing, and this is kind of the fifth thing that I wanted to talk about, is that when you do a PhD, it's very entrepreneurial to a lot of different degrees. So what do I mean by that? It's entrepreneurial in the sense that you kind of make things up as you go. So you can choose the research path that you want to do. You can choose that I don't want to focus so much on research, but I want to go teach. You can go into maybe you want to do a little bit of industry stuff. So you do kind of, one foot in industry and 1 foot not in industry. Maybe you do a little bit consulting on the side, something like that. And it's totally flexible with that kind of stuff. Now, I must say, to get tenure at a major research university is really hard to get tenure. So major research university are all the universities that you've heard of. In general, those are the ones that most people have heard about or they think about. And to get tenure at any of those institutions is really hard. So you're going to have to focus on research and do a tremendous amount of focus on research. So this program and this sort of thing that I'm doing with Reciprocity, it's really geared towards research because I want to actually build a platform that is easy to understand human behavior on that. So that's what Reciprocity is all about. But then also, if it ever makes money and stuff like that, I can actually start giving back to doctoral students and build a program that way. So it's kind of a unique thing that I'm trying to do. It's kind of, I'm exploring, right? It's entrepreneurial. So that's all I wanted to say about those are the 5 things I wanted to talk about. And there's probably more. Feel free to write comments and stuff like that if you think of others. But definitely Give me a thumbs up if you like this, if you find this helpful, and subscribe to the YouTube channel. I do appreciate it. So that's it. Take care and have a wonderful day. Bye.